everybody, welcome to Jacey's Creek. My name's Emily. Today we are talking about Season 2, Episode 11, which came out on January 20th, 1999. So before we get into it, I just want to say, make sure that you put on those post notifications so that way you can catch every episode. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, that's Jacey's Creek Podcast. Make sure you follow the Instagram, that's Witter and Potter, and make sure to follow the TikTok, Pacey and Joey. So, I also want to say, if you're listening to this, I hope that you have a wonderful day. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that this gives you some type of closure if you don't have any friends that you can talk to about Dawson's Creek or Pacey and Joey. I hope that this kind of gives you like that little mentality with your little heart, like, oh, someone to talk to about this, because that's how I feel most of the time. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first scene that we have is scene 1 of Joey, and we see Joey and Jack are outside of Joey's house, and Joey says, well, do you have everything? And Jack says, yeah, I think so. Joey just nods her head nervously and awkwardly, because if you didn't catch the last episode, Jack and Joey were kissing, and so now this is kind of like from the previous episode. And Jack says, yeah, I think so. And Joey nods, and Joey says, okay, well, thanks for posing for me. And Jack says, yeah, sure. So then it quickly cuts to Pacey and Andy standing at the side of the car kissing. And scene 1 of Joey cuts to Joey and Jack still in the same spot, and Jack says, you don't have any regrets, do you? And Joey shakes her head while smiling and says no, and Jack said, that's good. And Jack leans in and they kiss. And that was scene 2 of Joey. And then this is scene 2 of Pacey, where it cuts to Pacey and Andy says thank you. By the way, this is kind of like a time lapse from the last episode, so it just kind of continues. So that's why I'm like quickly going over it. And Pacey says thank you, and Andy starts laughing and says no thank you. And Pacey says no, really thank you. And Andy says no, really thank you. And Pacey's like, I insist, thank you. Then they had, they did the deed. And Pacey says, I insist, thank you. And she turns around and faces him, thank you. And she walks towards her house, which kind of describes their, relationship. They always have to have the last words. And that was the end of, this little time-lapse thing that was going on. I'm not really sure what it exactly was, but I guess it was cute. I don't really know what to think about it. Second scene of Joey is Joey in the cafeteria, and Jack and Joey are sitting next to each other. Jack says, so are we ever going to speak again? Because they're just kind of awkwardly being around each other, which honestly describes Joey with any real relationship that she goes towards. She just kind of shuts up afterwards, and Joey says, I hope so. And Jack says, why is it so awkward? And Joey says, I can answer that for 200, Bob, which... okay, Joey. It was just kind of one of those awkward scenes, but yet it was kind of supposed to be one of those scenes that you can tell from the feelings of how they were. And you can just tell that Jack was very awkward about this, and Joey was very awkward about this. So a combination, it just equals an awkward couple, and you can't really tell what they are at this point. So the third scene of Pacey that we see is he's opening up his textbook when Andy comes behind him and covers his eyes. And Andy says, hey, Mr. Witter, how are you? And they start kissing when Pacey stops and says, I probably shouldn't do this right here. And Andy says, I'm sorry, I just have a major lust issues when you're concerned. Thanks for last night. You were perfect, gentlemen. And I thoroughly enjoyed myself. You can tell that they definitely did it. And Pacey says, glad I could be of service. I had a nice time too. And Andy says, good. But we can tell in this scene that Pacey is just very, very awkward throughout the whole scene. And obviously there was some type of regret there holding on. And it wasn't like one of those scenes where Pacey was just being Pacey. It was literally Pacey just being a little bit quiet and awkward, like he wanted to say something, in my opinion. And that's how I view it the first time, and that's how I view it now. So the third scene we see is of Joey, and it cuts to Joey and Jack. And Jack says, "Did you finish your drawing? Did it turn up yet?" Or Joey reaches out and pulls back a blue folder, and she opens it, but Jack quickly shuts it because this boy is naked. And Jack says, "Whoa, hey, leaving my shameless nature has its threshold. It's only the only thing it's posing is in the quiet of your living room, but in the cafeteria, no, And Joey says, "Don't worry, Jack. This is strictly for my professional's eyes only." Joey, you're about to open it in front of the whole cafeteria. And Jack scoots in closer and he looks at it, and Jack says, "Do you think I could have it after you're done? I know, as a keepsake." And Joey says, "Why, so you can remember your 15 minutes of fame as a man model?" And Jack says, "So I can remember everything about last night," which was cute, but I mean, I would want to keep something like that too, mostly so that way no one shares it. But that's probably one of his reasons. But also, I think it was cute that he wanted to keep it so that way he could remember it. But also, why didn't Joey notice that? It was a little bit weird to me. Like, shouldn't someone notice that he wanted to keep that? One, because it's his personal possession. And two, like, you drew that, but it was of him, and it was a memorable night for sure. So, scene 4, we have a Pacey, and it cuts to Andy and Pacey, and Andy says, "What's this?" And Pacey says, "It's nothing, just a history quiz." And Andy says, "Oh, so what you get?" And Pacey says, never mind." And Andy says, "No, really, what'd you get?" And Pacey said, "It's none of your business," which, dang, Pacey really said, "Nope, you're not ever gonna know." And Andy asks what's wrong, and Pacey says nothing. And Andy says, "Is it a bad grade, or is it me? Are you giving me you're not sad about last night, are you?" And Pacey says, "No, last night was fun." Because I feel like Pacey does this thing, and maybe because he just doesn't want to ruin the relationship that he has with girls, but he kind of is just quiet about the whole situation, and he kind of ruins it for himself because he doesn't talk about it, and he just kind of says, "Oh, it was nice," and then he kind of got upset about the nice part. But over here, it was like he was just being kind of cold about the whole thing. Like, he wasn't talking, he wasn't saying anything, he wasn't being Pacey. Pacey wasn't being the person he always was. And so Annie says, "Look, I know that things escalated in our relationship, and a lot was said and done. And Pacey says, "Andy, can we just forget about this for right now? Please, it's just, I have to study. You want me studying, right?" And Andy says, "Sure. But more importantly, I just want to know that you're not going to turn into some stereotypical guy that turns off and shuts down as soon as the relationship starts to progress." And I don't want to say that's Pacey, but Andy did kind of describe Pacey a little bit, because I feel like he does kind of shut girls off when they get closer, not because he doesn't want to be with them, but also because it's just a big deal to him. Trying to be with someone was hard for him because he never got that love and support. It's part of who we are as people and who we are as the norm, because I feel like Pacey didn't get that love and support he got at home, therefore he didn't know how to do that with other people. He knew how to love people, but not really in the sense that someone else knows how to love people. Andy knew how to love people too, but it was also hard for Pacey just to open up to girls and women, and that might be because of his mom in a way, because maybe his mom didn't show enough love, or his dad didn't show enough love, because as we grow older, we are connected by our parents, and depending on how much love you get from your parents is how much love you're going to show to your significant others and your children and your friends. And so I feel like that's one of the reasons why Pacey is just the way that he is. And Pacey says, I'm not shutting down, okay? It's just, I'm really behind and I have to study. You understand that, right? And Andy says, yeah. So scene 4 of Joey. It cuts to Dawson and Joey standing outside of the school under the ledge, and they're being sheltered from rain. And Dawson says, hey, and Joey says, hey, Dawson, looks like scary weather. And Dawson says, yeah, I heard it was supposed to rain for the next couple days. What you got there? Motioning to the blue folder, which Dawson is just a nosy person. Like, he just wants to know everything and everything about everyone, and it's just so annoying to me. Like, why can't you just mind your own business? And Joey says, oh, this drawing for art. And Dawson says, and a gig man? And Joey says, yeah. And Dawson asks how it turned out, and Joey answers with saying naked with a laugh. And Dawson says, can I see it? And Joey says, how's that movie coming? Dawson just completely changes the subject because, one, it was none of his business, and two, it was of Jack, and she didn't want to invade his privacy because she knew that he wouldn't like that. And Dawson says, still casting. We can't seem to find a leading lady. And Joey asks, why's that? And Dawson says, well, it's difficult. The part requires a certain mixture of spirit and passion, wide-eyed innocent and unparable exquisite beauties. And Joey says that he sounds like he's looking for Julia Robbins. So I love that so much, that whole scene. But I like how she says that because, I mean, that was a good actress to reference that to. And Dawson says, what I need is you. And there's complete silence. And Joey says, Dawson, is this movie about us? Like, it just kind of dawns on her, like, oh, man, he did not just make a movie about us and our relationship because that's private business. But yep, he did. And Dawson says, it's drama and a vague of us. And Joey says, well, I should read it, don't you think? I mean, to make sure it's not a character assassinate. And Dawson says, Joe, I would never write anything hurtful about you ever. I hope you know that. That's wrong, Dawson. You would totally write something to hurt her because she hurt you. And Joey says, yeah. And Dawson says, look, I should just probably make a break for it. Thanks for waiting for me and praying with me. And Joey says, anytime. And she stares off of him as he walks away. I'm surprised he didn't, keep pushing her with the drawing. Maybe because he finally got to talk about something that he wanted to talk about. I'm not really sure why he didn't say anything about that. But also at the same time, I feel like when she realized that the movie was about them two, she was like, oh man, he really went that far. Which I feel bad for Joey in that part. Next scene is scene 5 of Pacey, and it cuts to Abby and Pacey at his locker, and she's holding a clipboard and a pencil. And Pacey asks, what's this? And Abby says, I know you can read, Pacey, it's a petition. And Pacey asks, for what? And Abby says, a school condom dispenser. I'm collecting signatures. And Pacey says, Abby, you're too much. And Abby says, teenagers these days, we grow up too fast. Sex is everywhere. Like, with you and Andy. And she just kind of pushes that button. And Pacey says, hey, tell me, Abby, what would it take to make you a distant memory? Just automatically hits her with that. And then the next scene is Chris actually intimidating Joey like he did with Pacey to get their signatures. The reason why they're getting a signature is because Pacey dropped a note in class, and it was about the sex night with Andy, because when she covered his eyes, that's when they were in class. And I guess she was just kind of like, he was feeling all the feelings and he was going to tell her how he felt, and even though we never saw that note, that's what everyone was trying to get the handwriting for. And it cuts to Chris and Joey, and Chris is motioning to a script, and he says, it's a good read. Recently he did some heavy duty reverse. Put a little lucky. Well, I don't know, to give it a good ending. And Joey says, look, Chris, I should wait until he asks. And Chris says, tell you what, I'll just slip in your bag right here and you can make the call. And Joey says, whatever. And Chris says, oh, Joey, you want to keep it on the QT. And she walks out the room and Chris looks under the table to find a large blue folder as Abby enters. So maybe it wasn't the signatures that she was trying to get, but I feel like there was one signature somewhere. Oh, it was, I don't know. Anyway, so maybe, yeah, anyway. So Chris was trying to do the same thing as Abby, but not really in a sense. And so scene 6 of Pacey, it cuts to the book fair, and Pacey says, hey McPhee, you got a second? And Andy says, I'm busy. And Pacey says, yeah, I know, but I need to talk to you. And Andy says, really? Apparently you've been doing enough talking for the both of us. And Pacey says, excuse me? And Andy says, you know, it's interesting that I get the cold shutdown non-variable Pacey while the rest of Cape Side gets the return Pacey Witter underachiever town librarians. And Pacey says, listen, I know you probably freaked out by my weirdness yesterday, and actually that's why I came here to talk to you, but you're kind of losing me on everything else. And Andy says, what have you been saying to people about us, Pacey? And Pacey says, about us? Nothing. And Andy says, that's not what Abby Morgan says, because Abby Morgan intimidated Andy. And Pacey says, come on, Andy, since when have you listened what Abby Morgan has to say? And Andy says, she knows. And Pacey goes, about? And Andy says, the other night. And Pacey says, what? What, Andy? What's to know? You and I shared a wonderful romantic evening. Andy says, if you weren't happy with me or what happened the other night, you should have made it clear instead of spreading all our sexual priority all over the school. And this kind of makes Pacey mad. He asks, are you kidding me? And Andy says, the other night it was personal. In fact, there was 4 passionate versions of it wafting all over the halls that makes someone think that someone's been talking. And it makes me not want to talk to you right now. And Pacey says, okay, if that's what you think, then I guess we don't have to say anything about it. And I feel like this episode was just kind of like recapping of what happened in the next episode, and there's not really much to talk about this episode, but I generally feel like Pacey would never talk badly about Andy and himself, but I feel like in another way he would tell Dawson if they were closer, but I also feel like he wouldn't because of Tamara and that whole season with her. I feel like Pacey felt like Dawson just thought as him like a sexual creature in a way, and I don't think Pacey would tell anyone because he's not close with anyone. He wouldn't give spreading it to Abby Morgan because them two weren't close at all. And so when Andy accused him of that, he was like, who would I tell, you know? I feel like that was his reaction. So the next scene that we have is scene 1 of Pacey and Joey. So we finally get to see them two together. And Joey and Pacey enter at the same time, which I found funny. We should have saw them too in the hallway because I can already imagine what they did. They're like, what are you doing here? Why, I was told to be here. What are you doing here? And so Pacey says, I see all the mystery so much too. So what's going down here? Is it some practical joke or what? And Joey walks behind him and goes, that's what I want to know too. And Pacey signs and says, you know, I have this horrible feeling I know exactly who's behind this. And then Dawson answers and he says, who? Could you tell me what's going on? And Abby enters the room. And Abby says, oh, look, all my favorite people gathered together in one room. I forgot, my camera. And Dawson says, I should have known. And Chris enters with a camcorder. And Abby laughs and says, oh, no, I didn't. And Jen says, Abby, what the various scream have you hatched up this time? And Abby says, all good things come to those who wait. But you never been through at postponing, please, have you? And when she says that, I'm like, all comes to those who wait in the beauty of it all. And I can't sing. Anyway, so Pacey says, why did you bring us here, Abby? take one of those scandalous bravos, and Abby says, actually, it's my mystery project. In my possession, I have a lost letter, that was written by one of you in this room to another in this room. Stop me if you hear this. I want to talk to you about last night. It comes out wrong, so I thought I would write it down. The last night was amazing, but having sex changes everything, and I think we should take some time before anything happens again. Which I don't feel like that was like a wrong thing to say, and I like that he had to like write it down because I feel like it was more personal, and I feel like because we know it's Pacey, and I feel like that's why he did it, not to be like rude, not to be like, oh, I didn't want to have sex with you. It was more like a personal thing, and he knew either way how Andy would take this, she would take it the wrong way. And Joey says, this is disturbed. I'm going out of here. And Abby says, oh, come on, Joey. Don't you want to stick around and see who the author of this letter is? And she takes a seat as Abby goes to the podium. And Abby says, sex. The world's greater mystery. Philosophies, poets, scientists over time have tried to rationalize, to explain it, glorify it, criticize it, and Dawson says, spare us the memoir. And Jen says, could you get to the point, Abby? And Jack says, who wrote this letter? Abby says, who wrote the letter? And she goes down and turns off on the lights. And Abby says, that's all you care about it, isn't it? Fine. When the letter was first brought to my attention, my gut said Dawson and Jen. She's been trying to seduce him for weeks, which I love how she says that. And now, with all their late night working sessions and having him relieved for his putty affair with Joey through his writing, I thought, maybe in the heat of the moment, he needed a Joey replacement. Then I thought, Dawson, no way. Saving himself for Joey or old age, whichever comes first. Love how she said that too. And Jen, she has way too much infinite issues to bump into someone she cares about. So my guess was Jack and Joey. Joey is a liberal woman these days, and underneath the Jack's sensitive little boy feelings, I have a feeling that their sex pit was just waiting to jump and suffer to Jack. Let me know when you're ready to graduate to a real woman. And Jack says, you're sick and wrong. And Dawson says, is she? We've seen all the pictures. And Joey says, what? You don't know what you're talking about, Dawson. That drawing was for art class. And Dawson said, what happened after the model session? And Joey says, what do you care? And Dawson says, maybe I don't. And Abby says, here we go, Chris, get it. And because they're trying to film it for a class. And Joey says, oh right, you're too busy rewriting your script to an infinite life. I know about you and Jen. And Dawson says, what do you care? And Abby says, how sad, romantic destiny fallen with the wrong person. And Dawson says, Abby, you have it all wrong. And Abby says, oh, you didn't have sex with Jen. And Dawson looks at Joey and then Jen. And Joey says, well, answer the question, Dawson, tell the truth. And Dawson says, the truth is he slept with Jack. And Joey says, maybe I did. And Dawson says, well, I slept with Jen. And Abby says, this is good. You did it. You did, didn't you? And Dawson says, did you? And Joey says, maybe. And Joey says, tell the truth. And Joey says, no, you tell the truth. And Dawson says, I asked you first. And then blah, blah, blah. And both of them say yes at the same time. And lightning crashes where both their faces are dropped. And there's a long silence. And Jen says, that's not true. We didn't sleep together. She just automatically went, nope, we didn't do that. And she's like, pathetic display over here is the main reason why. And Dawson sits at the tape at his desk, not facing Joey. And Jack says, we didn't either. And then Pacey's head is laying flat on the desk. And Abby says, well, there's one couple left. And Abby reads the note that says, sex changes everything, and I think we should have some time before it happens again. This only leads Andy. And Andy says, I didn't write that. And Abby says, of course you didn't. I checked the handwriting. It belongs to Pacey. And Pacey looks at Andy, and Andy says, you wrote that? And he doesn't make a move. And she's like, well, did you? And Pacey nods his head slowly. And Annie begins to cry, and she says, "So that's why you've been so weird and cold lately." And Pacey shakes his head no, and "What were you," and she continues by saying, "What were you trying to say with me? So you sleep with me and you don't want me?" That's not what she said at all. He was trying to say, like, "Hey, I don't want to do this again because I need time." But also at the same time, he should have said that to her face. And Annie says, "You disgust me." And Pacey closes his eyes as she storms out. He gets up and he walks over to Jack. And Pacey says, that's not how it is." And the group starts leaving. And Abby says, "Did you get that?" And Chris makes a thumbs up. And Jen says, "I don't know where you come from or have a more misfortune of being responsible for existence, but you're a lying, pathetic, and cruel person, and the fact that you're only 16-year-old makes me feel sorry for you that anyone else in the room has to live to attention." So I feel like Pacey did this not because he was just trying to be rude to Andy, but I feel like it was one of those scenes where it was kind of like she was hurt by it, but also like Pacey had to say what he had to say. So scene 2 of Pacey, Joey is giving her presentation, and Joey says, "Because of her well-drawn sleuth and clever mystery, Agatha Christie will remain as a prison woman, mystery writer of the past, future, and present. Thank you, Mr. Peterson." And Mr. Peterson says, "Thank you. Very good, Josephine. And now Abigail." I love how he just says Josephine and Abigail, the two names that they don't go by. And Abby pulls up a big red folder, and a tape sits on her desk, and Joey, Dawson, Andy, and Jen intently watch her. And Mr. Peterson says, "Is it possible, Mr. Morgan, that you're going to surprise me with your assignment? Is it possible that you have decided to be good for yourself and apply integrity to your education?" Okay. He's just an old, sad, lonely guy. And Abby looks around at Joey, Dawson, Andy, Jen, and Pacey, and she puts the holder back underneath her desk and says, I wouldn't want to disappoint you, Mr. Peterson. I didn't do it. And the integrity, just for the record, is a tire notion last in late 70s. And Mr. Peterson says, "Well then, I'm not sure lack of integrity will make you easier with your F." And Abby looks miserable, and Miss Smithy, that's what he says, and is next. So Andy's next, and she gets up and she walks past Abby while whispering "thank you," and Abby says whatever. So I feel like this wasn't a main scene with Pacey or Joey, but I do feel like this relates to them. So I feel like Abby did this because of everyone and everyone watching her, and she knew like she did it wrong, but I feel like it was mostly because Jen and what she said. I feel like Abby and Jen were somewhat close. They were just really bad friends, but I feel like Jen just kind of snapped her out of it. So the next scene that we have is scene 6 of Pacey, and it cuts to Pacey running towards Andy in the rain, and it gets in her car, and automatically Andy's so mad that she just says, "Get out." And Pacey's like, "We're not done." And Andy's like, "Oh yes, we are." And Pacey's like, "I know my behavior lately has been a little bit confusing, and I'm sorry for being so cold and distant, but a lot of stuff has been happening. I mean, I don't really know where to start." And Andy's like, "You can start by getting out of the car." And Pacey says, "How about I start with the truth?" And he digs around in his bag, and he pulls out a piece of paper and gives it to her. "My history quiz. I never told you my grade." And Andy says, "Pacey, you got and Pacey says, "An A. I got an A. The first A I've gotten my entire life." It kind of threw me for a loop. So what I think for Pacey, again, I will say this because I honestly think it's the truth, but I think with Pacey, he was so focused on how will I get past this, because he knows that if Andy and him break up, like, it's not gonna be like Andy's gonna help him with every single thing. Like, he still has to work through this. And so I feel like like I said earlier, when Andy was like, "You're such a good guy, like, you're amazing, and I think you're so nice and funny and smart," he was like, "What? No one has told me that before. What are you even trying to tell me?" And so I feel like when he is stuck with that, he's just like, whoa, someone thinks I'm amazing, someone thinks I'm smart, someone thinks I'm handsome, someone thinks I'm all these things, and I've never got told that. So when he sees his first A, that's kind of what goes through his mind. He's like, wow, I got my first A, and it's the first time that I feel like I'm accomplishing something. So that's how he feels, because he got told that he was going to fail his sophomore year and possibly not graduate. So now he is like, what? I just got my first A. How do I even begin to say this out loud, that it's me? It's not someone else. It's me who got this A. And so Andy asked why he worked so hard, and this is Pacey's response. Because it changes everything. Don't you see? Everything always been so predictable for you, but now my whole life course is changing. Ever since you and I had sex, I felt anxious, wondering should we have waited, should we have slowed down, wondering if it was the right thing, wishing I had taken the high road, and that's not me, I used to be so comfortably part about Pacey is just, I didn't expect that, and now I don't have a clue, and I'm terrified. And that's why I'm pulling away from you. And Andy says, it's okay to be scared, Pacey. The world is a scary, scary place, but I don't want you to be scared of me. And Pacey's like, how could I not be, Andy? You're the one person in this whole life for me I'm afraid of that. And Andy's like, what? And Pacey said, I'm afraid that you're the most single important thing ever to be grace existing. And Andy, I'm falling for you hopelessly in love. And it's silent. I love how he says this. He doesn't say, I love you. He says it in Pacey fashion, where he says, the single most important being to ever graced my existence. Oh, that's when we all fell more in love with Pacey. He doesn't say it in a sense like, you're amazing and I love you. He says it in this form and fashion that we all wish teenage boys would have said to us. But sadly, they never did. And he says, say something, because I'm kind of getting cut off and laid out for you. And Andy says, yeah, that was pretty scary. And Pacey says, that's all I have to say. And Andy says, no, I'll share your fear. And Pacey said, yeah. And Andy says, here it's Zach fear. And before this scene ends, I want to say that Pacey's hair in this was absolutely amazing. Or Joshua Jackson. Like, his wet hair soaking in his face, and the way that he gets into the car, I would, like, I don't know if anyone has seen this show, or if, like, some of you guys are like older than me or younger than me or whatever. So there's this show called Girl Meets World, and the only reason why I watched it was because of Boy Meets World. And in one of the scenes she goes, ho, 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 like something like that, and it just reminds me of that every single time I watch this scene, because I'm like, wow, Pacey looks amazing in this. So the next scene that we have cuts to Joey at her locker as Dawson walks up to her. To his, and they're close enough to each other, but they don't say anything. And Joey finishes and starts to walk away when Dawson stops her. Dawson says, you and I proceed till we're blue in the face, and when it comes to the time to actually doing it, we are left with it is a couple of harmless kisses. I mean, the setting was right, the timing was perfect, but nothing happened. Why? And Joey says, I know why. And Dawson says, you do? And Joey says, yeah, the same reason nothing happened with me. Dawson, it's not about the perfect setting. It's not about the perfect timing. It's about the perfect person. Which I do agree with that, but Joey does not realize that her perfect person is Pacey. And I think that's where it's going to come in a little bit later in season 4. And so she starts to walk out and head for the door as Dawson stares after her. And Joey is outside underneath the shredded from the rain, and Dawson comes out. Joey quietly says, hey, it was a little different than the hey earlier. No one asked about the naked guy or the movie or what the movie was about. But Dawson says, why didn't you but why did you want me to think that you slept with Jack? And Joey says, I don't know. I mean, I guess the same reason you wanted me to think that you slept with Jen. And Dawson says, that's not an answer. And Joey says, well, that's not the only answer that's the only answer you're getting, I guess. And Dawson says, I'm glad you didn't. And Joey says, I'm glad you didn't either. And Dawson says, Joey, I miss you. And Dawson says, and Joey says, I miss you too. Joey, he misses you so much that he's writing a movie about you and your relationship. How does that make you feel? Probably awful. And Joey says, well, maybe, he's like, Dawson says, I don't know if we were captive 15 years or what we had, but I'm willing to accept any small fraction you send my way. And Joey says, well, maybe we could start slowly. And Dawson says, okay, yeah. And Joey says, okay. And Dawson says, okay. And then he signs and he says, looks like this rain isn't going to let up anytime soon. So what do you say? We make a run for it? And Joey says, I say we walk. And they start walking. And Dawson says, what did you really think about my script? And they have this whole, like, coat, he puts the coat over their head. And if you ever read the fanfiction, The Man to Hold, I'm gonna actually read this to you guys really fast, because I want you guys to, like, read a little bit of it with me, because I love this scene, and this is kind of like the Dawson and Joey scene, but it's reversed to Pacey and Joey. So this is chapter 2 of The Man to Hold, and I will put a description down below if you guys want to read it. So it says, 2 days later, while eating lunch with Andy, Jack sat down at their table announcing he scored a date with Joey. He didn't know what to think, being caught between his best friend and Andy's brother, not to mention his own confusing dynamic with Joey was not going to be pleasant. He was determined to stay out of it and keep his distance from yet another love triangle and to focus on the only good thing in his life, Andy. He never wished to death upon anything like he had Abby Morgan. Hearing the thunder ahead of him and the pouring rain outside, he hoped that she'd get hit by lightning. As he walked out of school, cursing her name and praying she rots in hell, Joey's voice interrupted his reverie. Hey, Pace. Closing his eyes, he hung his head. He didn't want to deal with her opinions about his character in her lecture on mortality. Begrudgingly, he turned around. Yes, Joe? Can you get me a ride home? He blinked. Sure. He stood on the bench, staring at the parking lot. There was no way to avoid getting soaking wet. We're gonna have to make run for it. Ready? I don't know. I think we should walk. It's safer. Why walk when we could run? She nodded his head, hoisted her backpack over both shoulders. But I don't know if I can run, Pace. I don't want to slip and fall and break something. Wouldn't that just be a perfect ending to this day in hell? He held out his hand, fixing her with a steady gaze. I won't let you fall, Potter. Trust me. Smiling appreciatively, she slipped his palm inside his. He closed his hands around hers, holding her tight. Come on. They ran together through the rain into the parking lot, jumping into the Witter station wagon. They gazed at each other, both soaked to the skin, and laughed. But it wasn't long before his heart fell, his heart sinking within him as he thought of his Andy swirled inside his head. Do you want to talk about it? Joey embraced kindly. I got an A on a history quiz. She gave him a confused look. That's great, Pacey, but I don't understand. What does this have to do? He sighed. I never got an A before. I mean, Andy has completely... My life is slowly starting to change for the better, and suddenly that doesn't seem so hopeless anymore. She makes me feel like I'm not lost, 'cause, after all, which is a completely new feeling for me. You never have been a lost cause, Pacey. That's your dad talking. You shouldn't go listen to his crap because it's not true. He started the car and pulling out of the parking lot. Yeah, well, maybe if he was only Witter whenever said such, but we both know that's not the case. Other than Gretchen, I'm the bearer of the existence. Joey started playing with her fingers and stared down at her lap. So you and Andy had sex, and now you regret it? Regret is a strong word, he replied, turning out into the road. We don't have to talk about this, Joey. We know sex isn't your topic you really enjoy discussing. Because I'm a prude, right? She scolded. You know, Pacey, just because I don't particularly like talking about it doesn't mean I don't think about it or want it. Not now, of course, but you know, I will eventually. She blushed. Look, you can talk to me about whatever is bothering you with Andy. If you need someone to talk about it or don't talk, now sweat off my back. He rolled his eyes. Okay, fine. It was really special, but we haven't been dating that long. What if we went too fast and now it falls apart because there wasn't a strong foundation? A real relationship before rushing into things ruled by my hormones for once. And the thing is, it wasn't just my hormones. It really wasn't. It wasn't sex because I wanted to get it off. It was more than that. So much more that I don't even know how to put into words, and it scares me. I feel like I lost Andy, and not now and not ever, but I feel like I can't lose Andy, not now, not ever, but my life up until this point has been nothing but shit, and how can I expect the worst? Maybe we're moving on too fast and should hit the brakes. Pacey, whether giving serious thought and concentration to his action, colored me shocked. She smirked, her eyes sparkling humorously. If you want my opinion, and I know you rarely do, it sounds like you're in love with her. He let out a shaky breath. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. The other shoe paused to drop. They drove in silence until they arrived to her house. She reached for the door handle and towards him. Thanks for the ride. Nodding his head, he gave her a weak smile. No problem, Joe. Pacey, she said as she opened the car door. Don't be afraid for losing someone you love that you refuse to love anyone. Fear makes us run away from people we want most, cling to for the people we aren't right for us. But it won't bring happiness to our lives. Love is scary, and not loving is even more terrifying. You're the one to talk, Potter. She sighed and stepped out of the car. I'm a work in progress, but here we are. After she closed the door, he watched her run through the rain and disappear into her house. Her words danced around his head in the rest of his drive home. So the reason why I read that was because I felt like this was a good part where I want to say that they were running together, and the part where she says, I say we walk, kind of reminded me of that chapter. So I wanted to say, if you have not read The Man to Hold, I definitely advise you to read it, because as you heard, it's a really good story, and I feel like she takes like every part of a scene and like makes it even bigger with Pacey and Joey. So if you definitely like Pacey Joey, I recommend that. And if you want to read more, again, that was chapter 2. I suggest you continue reading because there's a lot of scenes that I will go back on, and I may read some more as the podcast continues, especially in season 3, because I feel like there's a lot that goes on with season 3 that reminds me of this fanfiction because they added on to it, and sometimes I even get confused on what happens because I'm like, that didn't happen, and that's how I felt when I rewatched this episode. I'm like, wait, didn't that fanfiction say that? And then I reread it, and I was like, oh my gosh, they took that part, and I just think it was so genius, and I really hope they come back because it's been since September since the last time they uploaded, so I am hoping that they come back, but maybe not. Anyway, so that was this episode. So if you like this episode, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, where I will be posting every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to follow my Instagram, Witter and Potter, and my TikTok, Pacey and Joey. And I'll catch you next time. Bye, guys.